Hello team, welcome to my session on Coffee with Prab, and today we're going to discuss about some coffee shots which is mapped with the domain 1 CompTIA Security Plus. Now those are new to my video. What does coffee shot mean? My questions which basically give you new thought process about the topic. I curated a questions in such a way that it is basically mapped with the concept of the particular certification. So I did a lot of videos on IC2 ISACA and it motivated me to pick one new vendor and covered the questions of that particular topic. My name is Prab Nair and I'm basically 17 plus year of experience with CISO and GRC profile. For more information, you can check my LinkedIn profile. And if you're new to the channel, to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss my future videos on a similar topic. So without wasting a time, let's start with the first part. Thank you. Okay, so let's start with the first coffee shot. Security administrator is investigating a recent incident where the sensitive company data was leaked online. The data was stolen on a cloud storage services used by the company. Okay. Initially, investigation revealed that access control were correctly configured and there were no unauthorized access attempts. However, it was discovered that employee inadvertently shared a link to the sensitive file on a public forum. So this is the problem statement. They shared the link to the sensitive files on a public forum. This action led to the unauthorized access of the data. That is another problem statement. So administrator is tasked with identifying which aspect of CI Triad was compromised and recommending a measure to prevent such incident in the future. So option A, incident compromise the integrity of a data, which is not true because integrity ensure the data should not be modified by unauthorized person. It's not talking modification, they say access. Incident integrity is all about ensure the data should not be altered by the unauthorized person. Let's take example. We have a system A. Okay, and we have a system B. So let's take example here. If the system A and system B want to communicate with each other. So how to ensure the integrity state of the system? Okay. So in this scenario, what happened is we have a data. So what we do, A, when sending a data to B, he will generate a hash value of the data. Hash value is a current digest value. So he will send to the B and tell, hey B, when you download the data, check the hash value which I sent on an email. So once he download the data, he compare the hash with what he received on an email. If it's same, it means this is the same state of data. So that is called integrity. So integrity ensures data should be protected from unauthorized modification. Second, say incident compromise the availability. Actually, here the link is there. So it is not about availability because availability ensure the data must be available whenever it required. Third is incident compromise the confidentiality of the data, which makes sense because in this scenario, they are able to access the information for which they are not authorized. And last is incident compromise the availability data, again the same, which is not true. So only option which is basically same here is C for Charlie, because in this scenario, the biggest concern what we discovered is they are able to access the file for which they are not authorized. Because confidentiality ensure the data is only available to the respective user. How? Suppose in this case, if this is the data we have, let's take example. Let's take example, we have a system A. And we have a system B. So BA want to ensure that this data is only and only available to B. So they protect with the password or put a access control and all that. And they basically share the password with B only. So once B download the data, he will apply the password and decrypt the data. Even C is there, which is not authorized to access this data. They cannot able to read the data because he need a password. So this is how we basically ensure the confidentiality of the data. Let's move to the next coffee shot. Thank you. Okay. During a routine audit of network security measure at medium-sized enterprise, security analysts discovered that several user accounts have been accessing resources beyond their required need for the job role. So keyword is basically beyond their required need for the job roles. Further investigation revealed that permissions for this account were set incorrectly. That's why they have access more than they desire to perform the task, which allow the broader access to the necessary resources. The analyst must determine which aspect of access control was not properly implemented, leading to the potential security risk by allowing the access privilege. Option A, identification. See, identification is basically all about providing your identity. It has no connect with the question. Authentication is basically, we talk about to prove someone that, okay, who the user claimed to be. Example, I am Prab, I'm traveling to Delhi via Trivandrum. So when I go to airport, say, hey, my name is Prab. So they will see my name in the passenger list. That is called identification. But to prove I'm the same person who claimed to be, who's part of a passenger list, I have to show my Aadhaar card and passport. That is the authentication. And question is not talking about authentication. They say accessing resource beyond the required. Third is basically called authorization. Authorization means which ensure the data is only accessed to the authorized person. So in the same airport example, they given me a seat number, and based on that seat number, I can access the particular seat. So that is called authorization. And last is basically called as integrity. Integrity ensure the data will not be modified by unauthorized person. But the question is not talking about anything about unauthorized modification. They say that permission for this account were incorrectly allow broader access. So it is actually a breach of proper authorization issue. And that is the reason we're going with the answer B. Because after proper successful identification and authentication, we define the authorization. And if you don't configure authorization properly, it could lead to the access scope privilege. And that is the reason proper access control, which is a part of authorization, is a most important requirement in IAAA. So let's move to the next coffee shot. Thank you. Interesting question. Another interesting question. During a security audit at large financial institution, auditor evaluating the access control mechanism. Makes sense? They focus on the initial step of the access control process to ensure each employee digital identity is correctly established within the company network. So auditor want to verify that the process adhere to the best practice for secure identity management. Which of the following best exemplify the principle of identification in the context of access control? So when you're talking about identification, it's all about presenting the identity. Okay. And checking whether this identity is registered in the database and verifying the person who claimed to be, that is authentication. So option A, system encrypt the communication channel when employee attempt to log in, ensure the username and password are not intercepted. But this is not about establishing identity. It is more like talking about confidentiality. It means the information you want to send over the network. So this is the username and this is basically a server example. So we have a user here and user want to connect with the server and he want to send the username and password through this particular channel. But the question is not talking about that. Question talking which is a principle which is used to simplify or exemplify the identification. So A is more about talking about sending the information in the encrypted manner, which is a confidentiality. So we remove that. Second is employee required to present a unique identifier, which is a username, such as usernames. Example, every company have a, see, your name is Amit. We have a multiple people with the same name with Amit, but your email address is basically unique. Your username which you create in a system is unique. So employer required to present a unique identifier such as username, because if everyone have a same username, we cannot able to track the accountability, which Amit has basically attacked. So employer required to present a unique identifier such as username and which claim their identity within the system before any verification of authenticity, which makes sense. Option C, after login, the system check the employee job title department to automatically adjust the level of access to the various company resource. But this is basically more about authorization. D say IT department issue one-time password to employee, which they must use along with the regular password for a two-factor authentication process. This is more about talking about verifying the authentication. So the closest answer is basically where it covers the identification, authentication is answer is B. Because employee required to present a unique identifier such as username which claim their identity within the system before any verification of authenticity. And that is how you can able to simplify or exemplify the principle of identification. If B is not there, we can still go with the D. IT department issue the OTP to the employee which they must use along with the regular password for two-factor authentication process. But the question is not talking about here validating the authenticity and all that. Question say verify the process adhere to the best practice and ensure each employee digital identity is correctly established. That is the reason. Okay. And another important thing is that B cover a very high level statement, where the D is only talk about one part which is called authentication. Let's move to the next coffee shot. Thank you. So question is which of the following Best describe a security control that monitor legitimate use of resource and right by the user and provide alert on unauthorized attempt or deviation from a normal usage pattern. It means the question talking about something related to the detective control. So option A, firewall. So if you take example firewall configured to block traffic from known IP address and log all incoming and outgoing network traffic. So firewall is more like a preventative control. Question talking about monitor the legitimate use of resources. Monitor the legitimate use of resources and right by the user. Okay, firewall is basically like a preventative control that we install on the enterprise to protect the organization from external attack. Option B, IDS. IDS designed to analyze the network traffic, alert on pattern that match known as cyber attack. Definitely IDS is basically more like a detective control, because if you see the logic of IDS, how it works is, this is basically the NIDS that we install on the border of the network. So this is basically called as a NIDS. Okay, and this is basically my server. So let's take example in the NIDS, we define the rule is source is any, because it's difficult to predict the source. Destination is basically a web server. Source port is any. Definitely we cannot predict the port, but destination port is basically 80. So if someone is trying to send the connection on port number 77, 70, so NIDS will basically log the traffic. It will not block, it will block. It will log, it will not block. But the question talking about security control that monitor the legitimate use. Okay. So IDS is more about detecting the unknown patterns and all that. ACL, again, option C, ACL that specify which user or process are granted access to object, as well as what operation are allowed on a given object. But ACL is more like a preventative control. If you click on the right click on the folder, in the folder there is an option called access control matrix. Which user you want to give access, that's something defined through the ACL. But D say an audit and monitoring, that is basically record user activity and access control. And another important part here is what we called user control and user resources, issuing alert when unauthorized access attempts are detected or when there is an anomaly in usage pattern. So B is part of a D, because overall by using a general audit and monitoring system which include your IDS, we can able to track the activity, and that is the reason answer is basically D. If D is not there, the next best answer is basically B, because just having IDS we cannot able to monitor. We need an overall accounting and monitoring. So if you go by the identification, authentication, authorization, make sure it has been done properly. We have accounting, and accounting is basically come from the point of view of auditing and monitoring. That is the reason answer is basically D for Delta. So let's move to the next question. Thank you. Okay, next coffee shot. IT administrator is setting up access control for new database server that will contain sensitive financial information. The administrator needs to ensure that only specific user can access and modify this data according to their job responsibility. Which of the following best describe the process of granting this specific user the right to access and use the database server? Very good and very interesting question. The question was talking about access of the data, and it should be done according to the job responsibility. So if you see the option is authentication, authentication definitely verify the user who claimed to be. So user has provided the username, it is exists in the database, but now we need to verify who claimed to be. So by entering the password, he can verify. But question is not talking about that, because question say user can access and modify data according to responsibility, granting this specific user. Okay, even I am the user who is authenticated with my password, doesn't mean I have access of everything, right? I got a seat, it doesn't mean okay I own the entire plane, right? So after authentication only we decide the access level. So A is removed. B, authorization makes sense, because authorization is all about ensure a particular user will get a particular access to the resource after the successful identification and authentication. Because when you log into your system with the right password, according to the current system state, you will get an access to your resources. As a cousin, if I deny you to access my folder, even you're the even you're the authenticated system user, you cannot access my resource, because for my resource you have been denied. So B makes sense. C is accounting. Accounting is all about tracking, but the question is not talking about tracking. Auditing again is a part of a monitoring. So the only option is basically left is called as a B for beta. Because if you go by the logic here, we have a user example. Okay. So we have a user. Now user want to access this particular system A. Okay. So when user try to access the system, he enter the username and he enter the password. They verify the username and they verify the password. After that, they basically give the resource access. Okay. But now we have a user 2, and on his folder, he basically deny user A. So even you are successful authenticating with the system, in that case, he cannot able to access this user resources, because in the authorization, we have denied his access. So authorization ensure who can basically access a particular resource. And that's why in authorization, access control is basically the core function we have. And that is the reason answer is basically B. Let's move to the next coffee shot. Thank you. Look, interesting coffee. An organization aimed to ensure high level of availability for its critical online transaction processing. Which of the following measure would most effectively achieve this objective? See, whenever you're dealing with online transactions, it means you're talking about availability. Okay, so let's take example, you work for the e-commerce business. So for e-commerce, availability is important. Okay, or you're working for the healthcare, for them confidentiality is important. If you're working in the financial sector, integrity is matter. But here the question say critical. See, we have a two type of data. One is basically called as a critical. Okay, and one is basically called as a sensitivity. So criticality is basically deal with the, you can say, availability of criticality is deal with the availability of a data. Okay, availability. It means if this data is unavailable, what is the impact? And sensitivity is basically deal with the disclosure of data. It means I have my PHI, personal health information. I want to make sure this is only available to the subject. But if it's available to everyone apart from subject, then this value of this information is gone. Okay, so sensitivity is the information which deal with the confidentiality, and criticality is the information deal with the availability. Always remember. And here the question talking about ensure high level of availability for its critical online transaction. So option A, establish the comprehensive disaster recovery plan. That makes sense because disaster recovery plan is basically ensure in the case of disaster we can recover. But it's not about recover. They say ensure high level of availability. Okay. A is basically more of a, you can say, strategic plan. Okay. B say conduct a regular penetration test. We can go for penetration test also. But penetration test is all about exploiting the vulnerabilities, and when you're doing an aggressive pen test, it can downtime the system. Third is called redundancy and fault tolerance system. Makes sense. What do you mean by redundant? Redundant basically means duplicate. So if we have 3 servers, so these 2 are basically identical of 1. So because they are redundant in nature, if any load is coming on the server 1, it can shift to 2. If any load is coming on the 2, it can shift to 3. So they overall providing me a fault tolerance services in nature. So by having a redundancy and fault tolerance, we can able to achieve. D say increasing of frequency of data backup and offset storage. D is basically makes sense when you're talking about backup concept, and we are not talking about backup here. And that is the reason the close answer is basically C for Charlie, deploying the redundancy and fault tolerance system. Let's move to the next coffee shot. Security engineer is implementing a new system that require validity of identity before accessing the company resource. This process involve the user provisioning a username and password, in some cases biometric scan. Which of the following term best describe the process? Okay, now keyword here is username is there, but password or in some case of biometric, which look like a different type of authentication factor. If you see option A, authorization, A pertain more to the identification fraud prevention measures to ensure that, okay, customers are legitimate and we only ensure that authorized person can able to access. But the question is not talking about anything about authorization. They say that, okay, they want to implement a new system and they want a validity of the identity. The whatever he produce, we need to verify that. Option B, authentication, definitely. If you are a prub, show me the ID card, which can prove you are a prub. If you're entering the username and you claim to verify you are a user, type the password. Option C is accounting, which is more from monitoring point of view. D is basically the identification, the ID that you enter. Okay, so D is already done. Matlab, you already said, validity required the validity of the identity. It means identity is already presented. The only way we can able to validate the identity before accessing a resource, because before accessing a resource, how it works is first we have a identification, then we have a authentication, and then we have a authorization. So after successful identification, you move to authentication. If you do the successful authentication, then only you talk about the access. So here the question talking about validity of this identity before they access the information. So answer is basically authentication. Now authentication is also three type. Something you know, which is a password, something you have, that is your token, and something you are, which is your biometric. Okay, so single factor is always weak, so that's why we basically go for the multi-factor authentication, and that is why in this case answer is basically B for beta. Okay, so this is all from my side in the first coffee shot. Do let me know how do you find this particular video, and if you find this video useful, do share your network and share a suggestion which help me to improve my content more better. Because if you basically there to watch my video, then only my channel is exist, and you are the biggest motivator for me to make this content. Okay, so I will wait for your feedbacks in the section of video. I'm planning to release the second part of the video where I'm going to discuss about the control types and category. Good day, bye.